Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Road to November, Politics in America, Analysis of the Final Presidential Debate. We have a wonderful program in store for you today. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded and circulated to all participants after the event. Additionally, should you have any questions that you would like to submit to the panel, you may submit them through the chat box at the bottom of your screen. With that, I would now like to turn things over to today's moderator, Eric Tannenblatt, the Global Chair of Denton's Public Policy and Regulation Practice. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you, and welcome to a special edition of our Road to the White House, Road to November webinar series. Today, we're going to get some timely analysis from our political experts on last night's presidential debate, the final presidential debate, and talk about what it means overall for the race. I'm pleased to once again be joined by four of my Denton's colleagues who have both distinguished careers in public office and a deep knowledge of national politics. So please join me in welcoming former Vermont Governor Howard Dean, and who's also the former chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Ron Kaufman, who is a former White House political director and current treasurer of the Republican National Committee. Mayor Michael Nutter, who's the former mayor of Philadelphia, and Representative Polly Lawrence, who's the former Republican leader in the Colorado General Assembly. I'd like to start off, let's get right into it, and start off by getting each of you to share your views on last night's debate. And why don't we start with you, Governor Dean?
Thanks, Eric. And Polly, congratulations on your promotion.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
I thought it was pretty even. I think it was as well as the president can ever be well behaved. He was until about the last 20 minutes. I don't think it moved the needle at all. Biden did what he had to do. He looked presidential. He reassured people that there was a lot of back and forth. My guess is it didn't move the needle in any way. And if it was, I mean, the polls show that people thought Biden won the debate. Maybe that's true, maybe, who knows. It showed that the numbers weren't as big for Biden as they were after the first debate. So I'm guessing it was a missed opportunity for the president. He had he's 10 points behind nationally. He had a chance to catch up, and he didn't do that because he went back into his conspiracy theories and blamed Biden for some obscure bribery nonsense. But we'll see. I mean, now we're down to the last 11 days, and I can't wait till we get to day 15 plus 15 when we finally actually know what the results are.
Ron, your reflections on last night?
Well, thank you, Eric, and glad to do this, and glad that Governor Dean is actually watching the football game versus the debate. I think they both did fine. I thought the moderator was fine, I guess. But I thought the president did what he had to do. And that's before the debate. Clearly, to be candid, the Democrats had some momentum. And I blame that mostly on this race up until last night was about a referendum on the president, period. Now, it's always about, re-elections are always about the incumbent, but this was just about the president and not about the other side. And I thought last night changed that. I thought the president very skillfully made this race about a binary choice. Do you want to have the president 4 more years, or do you want to have the vice president take over 4 years? And I think that contrast, the change, is going to be significant in the close. Now it's up to the Republicans to make that case that we have a 4 more years that the American public want. And I thought the vice president talked about going down some dark winter hole for the next 4 years. And I thought President Trump did a good job of saying, listen, we're going to turn a corner. We understand now more about this virus. We're going to be able to control it, take care of it, have a vaccine sometime at the end of the year and distributed by next year. And we're going to be into a robust recovery for the next 2 or 3 years. I think that contrast between reminded me about Ronald Reagan in 1984 when he won re-election on It's Morning in America Again. Sure, we have problems. Sure, the virus is still with us, but I think you can look around the corner and see a better day. And the president saw a better day, and the vice president saw a dark winter. And I think I'll take that any day.
Mayor Nutter, your
Mhm.
thoughts?
Yeah, I really got to get some of whatever Ron is taking up there in Maine. I mean, it just really sounds like some good stuff. I think for Vice President Biden, those of us who have run for office or been on a debate stage or whatever the circumstance, I have to think that at the end of last night, he had to say to himself, that's just one more thing that I will never have to do again in life, is to be on a stage with Donald Trump and his lingering COVID-19. I thought from a, who did what standpoint, I think each to some extent did what they needed to do. I thought that there were certainly some opportunities that the vice president, could have, in a boxing analogy, I mean, certainly could have very effectively counterpunched on. He didn't have to punch every time. He just really needed to get through 90 minutes of being on that stage. Go back to something the governor said. I'd like to think that I'm a fairly informed person. There were so many occasions, my wife and I are sitting there watching, and we're literally looking at each other, asking aloud, because we often talk to the TV. What is he talking about? Literally, what is he? I mean, it's all of the laptop and emails and China. I mean, it was again, in boxing terms, I mean, as a boxer just throwing punches all over the place, none of which were landing anywhere. And I thought the discipline the vice president showed, for the most part, to not take the bait, to not go down a variety of rabbit holes that he loves to open up. And at the end, you're left with, in contrast to Ron, Donald Trump made no case last night for why he should actually be reelected. This idea, this is not Morning in America. It's far from that. Vice President Biden did not invent the term dark winter. I think that actually came from medical professionals who know something about this. And for the 220,000 people who have died and the estimated 200,000 more who unfortunately are estimated to die, it is not morning, it is evening on their lives. And the idea that somehow a vaccine is the be all and end all of this current situation is just fantasy. He didn't even articulate what should be done now to try to prevent the estimated 200,000 more people who will die by the end of the year or into January. We heard none of that discussion. So, Vice President Biden got through it. Donald Trump was more restrained. I guess the mute button actually did work. But I didn't hear a case for reelection. I heard conspiracies and political gripes.
Holly, your thoughts?
Well, I think Vice President Biden was able to stand up on the stage and make his way through 90 minutes. To me, that doesn't really say much about him. I think that was how low the bar had been set, was he just needed to make it through 90 minutes. I think he made a huge mistake when he said, I have never said I would ban fracking. If you have proof of it, put it on your website. There are multiple instances where Vice President Biden said he would end fracking and we would end the oil industry. So challenge accepted. And now those clips are on websites around the country. This was obviously a much more respectful debate than it was the first time. It was not two men yelling at each other and telling the other to shut up and talking over one another. So it was more substantive. I don't know that it really moved the dial a lot. I would say on Vice President Biden's take on COVID, a lot of what he suggested is already being done with testing. And I don't think the Operation Warp Speed would have happened under a Biden administration, where you have multiple pharmaceutical companies working to come up with a vaccine for this virus. I think that's something that the president really isn't getting credit for, and he probably should. But, you know, the president was right when he said, look, New York is not the same as South Dakota, which is not the same as Texas, which is not the same as California. Each of these states need to take an approach that fits that state. And I think that's what the governors are doing. That's what mayors are doing. And the president may have come a little bit late to wearing a mask in public. I would say there are a lot of people in Colorado who don't wear masks in public. So some of that has to do with just a personal choice by individuals around the country. But I think making a case that each state is different and each instance needs to be handled separately was a good talking point for the president last night.
Governor Dean, do you think that last night's debate made any difference with undecided voters?
It could have. First of all, undecided voters are a tiny pool. Second of all, because one of the attacks on the vice president has been, oh, he's incoherent, he's senile, and all this kind of stuff. Well, he certainly wasn't. I mean, he did it more than a workmanlike job presenting as a president of the United States. So I think probably if there were any undecided voters, they were leaning more towards Biden afterwards. The problem is Trump is sort of a one-trick pony. He appeals to his furious base, and that's about as far as it goes. I mean, all this stuff about Burisma and the laptop, I can guarantee even his base had no idea what the hell he was talking about there. That can't have helped him very much. So I would give the edge to Biden.
Ron, how about same question for you? Do you think it impacted undecided voters?
Normally, the debate itself that night doesn't really move folks. It's what happens afterwards that counts. And, you know, when he, as Paulie mentioned earlier, when he said, I never said I want to stop fracking. There are at least 20 different takes I've seen last night on different videos of him saying just that, you know, and I think that's a problem for him. The crime bill is a great example too of the president have a good night. He talked about the fact that Biden was for the crime bill, and Biden said, well,
he wrote it. Of course he was for it.
Can I finish there?
Sorry, Ron. I could be Captain Obvious sometimes.
I know. Eric, use that button, will you? Anyway, but Biden was for the crime bill. He said, well, we let 10,000 people out of jail, right? But President Trump passed the Prison Reform Act, which let tens of thousands of people who should be out. I think those kind of things happened throughout the night. And collectively, did they make a difference last night? Maybe yes, maybe no, among a few. But I think as this plays out the last week, again, as I said earlier, I think for the first time in this whole race, Eric, we legitimately have a binary choice. We'll see where that takes us. Obviously, the folks on the left are going to say, we like the fact that Biden's going to take this country far to the left. And the people on the right say, well, we can't let that happen. And it's going to be the middle that decides this. It's going to be the College community around Philadelphia. It's going to be, you know, middle America. It's going to be the key states. And I'm comfortable that for the first time, this will be a binary choice. And that's a whole bunch better than just talking about the incumbent.
Yeah, Governor Dean, I'm glad you raised the fact that there's a very small number of undecided voters. And if you look at the early vote numbers, I mean, they're like off the charts compared to 4 years ago.
Right.
But Mayor Nutter, do you think that last night did anything with undecided voters?
You know, I find it painful, to be honest, and hopefully all of the participants in the call today have actually decided. But I have to admit to you, I find it you know, all the different shows usually have these panels with undecided voters. And I mean, we got it's 11 days to go. What what piece of information are you waiting for that is sudden? I mean, are you waiting for, Atlantis to come from the ocean or Zeus to come from the clouds to deliver like this final piece of information that is suddenly going to open the heavens for you? I mean, I think that pool is small. I don't know what those folks are waiting for, but, Ron, I do find it interesting. There are a lot of components to the crime bill, but that's Donald Trump's response. And I will tell, not because having nothing to do with the fact that you raised it, because you were answering that question, but as a Black man, I am so offended that the question was, what would you say to Black people about the fact that they have to have the conversation with their children? My best guess is Donald Trump had no idea what the conversation is, and therefore completely ignored, or the question went over his head. But his response, whenever asked about Black or brown people, is to talk about criminal justice. Most of us are not in jail and will not be in jail. And so that's all he ever talks about as it relates to Black people. Some of us actually care about education. Some of us actually care about entrepreneurship or finance or getting a job or economic development in our community. So he got that bill passed. That's fine. A bunch of people worked on it. And you had a Senate that was willing to give him that victory as compared to maybe in the Obama administration. And so, but it also put 100,000 cops on the street. It also provided significant protections for women in domestic violence situations. And as everyone on this call knows, the vast majority of people who are in prison are actually in state and local prisons, not the federal prison system. And I think lastly, if I'm recalling, I think the vice president actually said that some of the elements of the bill were a mistake. Now, I don't know about you, but it is a rare circumstance to hear anyone in office or who used to be in office actually admit that they made a mistake, unlike the current occupant of the White House, who has never made a mistake, never admitted to anything or apologized for anything. Did you hear the part where he mentioned that people who actually show up for their immigration or amnesty hearing are those who have a lower IQ? Are you serious?
Going back.
Ron, did you want to respond?
Sure, I would like to, if I could. A couple of things. I agree with you, Mayor. You probably didn't know, so I am not Black. I can't change that.
I picked that up.
But I'll tell you this, I totally agree with you on that. And it is what has to be fixed. The idea that your kids, any kids have to wake up in America and get a special lecture on how to handle that situation is really not acceptable. So we're on the same wavelength when it comes to that, Mayor. But you must have missed part of his answer on that question, because he did say, when it comes to education, he put more money into historically Black colleges than they asked for, and more than any president in the history of the country. He did say that before the pandemic hit, that there were more African American, Blacks, and Latinos and women working at a higher rate of pay than ever before in the history of a country. Right. He did say that among Black Americans and Latino Americans and women, more people were employed than ever before in history. So I thought that was one of the answers, quite frankly, he did a really good job with, not a bad job with.
And all of those are so I give you all that information, but context, of course, is also important. The Obama administration actually proposed additional funding for HBCUs, which again, the Republican Congress would not pass. Donald Trump was handed the lowest unemployment rate at the time for the Black community and going down at the tail end of the Obama administration. And every other stat, Ron, that you laid out, those numbers were already going in the right direction. Just like the stock market was on its way up from a low of 6,000 to 7,000 at the height of the last Great Recession when I was in office, on its way to 18,000 to 19,000 when Trump took office, right? So, I mean, it's a much greater expansion over time. So if I'm coming into office and someone hands me all of these goodies, you might at least want to be honest as to where the goodies came from, while you're then taking credit for just kind of hanging around and letting things go. As I think I said on this program, on this series once before, at the height of the Chicago Bulls run, if I was coach right after Phil Jackson, I think they would have probably won the NBA championship the next year.
Being a
All right,
Boston Celtic. All right.
We can argue this for hours. So
Yeah.
in the moments that we have left, I want to ask each
What,
of you
my
to respond
basketball
to this.
coaching skills, which are
Yeah, it's
I'm
not-
going to start.
of which
Oh, yeah.
there are none.
I'm a Celtic fan. So I get
I'm-
this.
All right, I'm going to ask each of you to just sort of give me your take on where you see the race right now. The debates are behind us. We're getting down to the last 10, 11 days of the campaign. Where do you see the presidential race right now? Starting with you, Polly.
Okay. I look at a lot of these polls and I see numbers that are extremely similar to where they were when he was running against Hillary 4 years ago. So I don't always buy into polls, having read them and having worked with them on local office races. They're not always reliable. So I'm going to take that with a grain of salt. I think one of the biggest things that we need to pay attention to was a question that was asked of Vice President Biden a week ago, where 56% of people asked said they're better off today than they were 4 years ago. And he said, well, then I guess they shouldn't vote for me. I think that is telling when people are actually looking at how they are today versus 4 years ago. And even though we've seen a downturn because of the pandemic, we are seeing a rapid increase in jobs coming back and businesses reopening, maybe in new creative ways. And people are feeling more hopeful than they were a couple of months ago. So I think building on that is something the president is going to do. And I've also talked to people. The president has had people on the ground across the country for over a year, making personal contacts with voters. There have been over 1.5 million personal contacts in Colorado by the Trump team. I think that is significant, and I think it's going to make a difference.
All right, Mayor Nutter, your thoughts?
Well, I agree with certainly the first part of what Polly said. For many of us, I mean, this is way beyond, deja vu all over again. And, I would say cautiously, somewhat optimistic. This race is going to tighten. Vice President Biden clearly has a path to demonstrate victory. I think, we were talking earlier about Pennsylvania. It'll stay with Vice President Biden in the lead, but even that will shrink to some extent. Florida, they seem to be neck and neck. North Carolina seem to be neck and neck. I'll leave the rest for Governor Dean is better on the numbers than I am. But certainly Vice President seems to be doing well in the, 6 or 7 states that, most say ultimately will decide this. And so, I think he's just got to stay out there. I mean, the vigorous level of campaigning that he's been doing over the course of the last month. I mean, as I say, you can pretty much do anything for about 11 days or so. And I think at the end of the day, the vice president becomes the 46th president of the United States of America.
Ron, where do you think things stand today?
Yeah, a couple of things, Eric. If you look at 1980, this time exactly in 1980, pretty much, it was a dead tie between Reagan and Carter. Debates were over, and it was back and forth depending on the poll. It ended up being a pretty good day for the Republicans. They won the presidency and the presidency, and they picked up 12 seats in the House and the Senate. I think it comes down to both campaigns and what the strategy is. As Paulie referred to earlier, the Republican strategy for president started the day after he was sworn in, when the president announced his reelection. And along with the RNC, we sat down and stole President Obama's brilliant game plan from 2008 and 2012 of investing a lot of money in data, technology, and infrastructure and ground game. And since then, we put in hundreds of millions of dollars into data, technology, and digital. We have people on the ground. We now have 2,700 people paid staffers on the ground. Some of them have been there for a year, like in Colorado. Some have been there 2 and 3 years. And if you remember, that's the Republican side. On the Democratic side, Joe Biden came in 4th in New Hampshire just in February. He was broke, had no campaign staff, took an American Airlines plane down to South Carolina. The DNC was broke. Jim Clyburn, in that brilliant speech he made, changed all around. Instead of having Bernie Sanders as the nominee presumptive, Joe Biden won South Carolina and went on to be the nominee presumptive. They do have some momentum, which is why I think last night was important. So it's really momentum versus organization and infrastructure. Which one's going to win? In 2008 and in 2012, it was Barack Obama. Right now, I don't think anyone really knows, to be fair, which of those two things are going to be successful, not election day, but election week, unfortunately, that we're going to see. But it's going to be an interesting test for both parties.
Governor Dean, you get the final word.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to be with Michael on this one. Here's the problem for Trump. Everybody knows Donald Trump. He has very strong opinions about him. They either love him or they can't stand him. And Joe Biden's up by 10 points. 10 points is a lot. And I agree with Mayor Nutter that the margin will shrink some. I think we're going to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And I don't think we're going to lose any additional states. And in addition to that, I think we have a shot at Georgia. We have a shot at North Carolina. We have a shot at Texas, which is pretty incredible. And Biden is up by 6 in Florida. Now, anything can happen in those places. And the governor of Texas is busy crushing the ability to vote as much as possible by having a single ballot box for ballots in all of Houston, just 2.5 million people. I mean, this kind of crap. I mean, if Trump does win, it's going to be a Pyrrhic victory because nobody's going to believe it's an honest election. I think Biden is going to win, and I think a 10-point lead. The other thing about this race, which is really interesting, is Hillary was never over 50%. Biden is. And just so I'm not a totally impeachable source, The Economist, which is following this race, gives Biden today a 92% chance of winning the Electoral College and the general election. So the race is not over. We've got a lot of work to do. I don't agree with Polly that the door-to-door stuff is effective. Trump is going to get creamed in Colorado. I don't care how many doors he's knocked on. He's busy spreading the virus as he goes, or as they all go. So I'm optimistic. What I fear is the aftermath of this election. I don't think the divisiveness is going to be over no matter who wins. I think it's going to be a huge problem. We've got an enormous amount of work to do to find common ground between the incredibly divisive. This is the worst I've ever seen. This is worse than the 60s. I went through the 60s and it was terrible. And at that time, today, it's the right wing that's insane. But then it was the left wing that was insane. They were blowing up buildings. They killed a physics professor in the University of Wisconsin because they were blowing up a building he happened to be working in. So we're at a very, very polarized time. There's not as much violence as there was in the 60s, but there's more division. And that's and I think Biden is the right guy to heal that division. I think he's been respectful to the other side, and I think that's very important.
Well, I want to thank all of you, as always, for your thoughts and reflections. Next week is going to be our final Road to November webinar before the election. It's going to be next Thursday at 2:00, which will get your final thoughts as we head into the last weekend before an election that seems like it's been going on for years. We're also going to be joined next week by two of our other colleagues, former U.S. Ambassador Gordon Giffen and Ashley Bell, who recently joined us from the White House, to talk about what a second administration for President Trump would look like, and for Gordon to talk a little bit about what a first Biden administration may look like. So it should be an interesting discussion. Look forward to seeing all 4 of you and look forward to seeing all of our participants return. So thank you all. I hope you all have a great weekend. Take care.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Dean.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Early and often.